Hello class, welcome back to Writing 101. Today we'll be focusing on revision. And to start, I will be reading you a couple quotes from Stephen King on Writing, a memoir of the craft. Now, because it's largely a memoir, the lessons for writing are peppered in. So if you do take this book, which I do recommend, really pay attention. I know it's going to be annoying to some people to have to read through someone's life instead of something very academic, but it does make it easier for those who don't like academic books. Maybe you don't like textbooks and you need a break from that. This is definitely a good read if that's the kind of reader that you are, or student. So, the first quote in regards to revision, on page 57, if you want to follow along and you have this book, okay, paragraph here. So his professor, John Gould, says, Gould said something else that was interesting on the day I turned in my first two pieces. Write with the door closed. Rewrite with the door open. Your stuff starts out being just for you, in other words, but then it goes out. Once you know what the story is and get it right as you can, anyway, it belongs to anyone who wants to read it or criticize it. If you're very lucky, this is my idea, not John Gould's, this is Stephen King saying this, but I believe he would have subscribed to the notion more will want to do the former than the latter. So that's something I agree with wholeheartedly, that the first draft of your story is just for you, meaning you're not stressing about the finer details. You're just going blah, just, you know, like my first note here. Word vomit, okay? Just right. First thoughts. That is the first draft, just like Stephen King said. Done with that. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? Word vomit. Basically, any first idea or thought you have in your head, that's the first draft. You don't worry about even your outline or the step-by-step process you did for your entire planning, especially if you're writing an extremely rich high fantasy story where you researched a bunch of things like religion, classism, old versus new English. I don't know, it depends on your process. But anyway, first draft is just do it. That's kind of the catchphrase for draft one. But everyone knows that. But if you're a novice, just understand that. And also understand that as you become more and more practiced as a writer, your first draft when you're first starting out compared to later, like over time, is going to be very different. Because you don't have the tools yet. You're still learning how to write. So that's why it could be very difficult to write more than, say, 200-300 words in a day. Because you are still learning. How do I tell a story? What's involved in this craft? What is emotional anchorage? What does character arc mean? What's a hero's journey? All these technical terms that you're still learning or haven't learned yet. So that's kind of the gist of draft one. Draft two, make your story how you want it. Use your tools. So there's actually another quote here regarding tools. So, you see here. Okay, so right there on page 114. I want to suggest that you write to your best abilities. It behooves you to construct your own toolbox and then build up enough muscle so you can carry it with you. Then instead of looking at a hard job and getting discouraged, you will perhaps seize the correct tool, and get immediately to work. So what exactly does that mean? It means, let's say you're in university, or you read a bunch of books on how to write, and you start learning about all this technical jargon and technical skills involved in storytelling. That is what you include in your second draft. You start looking at the structure of how to do a story and what kind of story are you telling. I don't mean genre or even perspective, first person, second person, third person, omniscient, whatever. I mean, what is the message? What kind of story? What kind of character arc? Is it going to end in the first book? Is it a series? All these things. Especially a series. That's much harder. So in the second draft, you have to ask yourself, how much am I telling in this first installment of the series? How far am I going in terms of the character arc? Is it going to be a trilogy? Is it going to be 7, 20 books? I don't know. It depends on how rich your character is. So second draft is about asking, in summary is what I'm saying here, what can I do with my tools here to make this story the way I want it to? Not just how, but what am I going to say at the end? You know what I'm saying here? Is the ending going to change in the second draft? Is it going to change in draft 3? I don't know. But after the first draft, that's what you're focusing on, is not refining the grammar or anything academic, but just the overall story that you're trying to tell. So that's it for quotes here that I could pull for revision. I do highly recommend this read. I don't really read books anymore on how to write. I just kind of go with my gut. But if you're still learning, definitely read this. Okay? That's just my personal opinion. That's not sponsored by Stephen King. That would be insane. Okay, third draft. This is just my personal opinion. Cleanup. So what does that mean? That means that after you've gotten to the story of how you want it, then you can start working on your grammar and whatnot. And maybe even shifting things here and there. Maybe a chapter is not in the right place, or a paragraph doesn't really fit right in a certain scene. That's when you can start to organize your story the way you want it, after having just done the fiddly work of plot hole filling and all that stuff. As for the number, which is what I'm going to say right now, after third, and I mean literally third draft. I don't mean your idea of third draft. Revise until you are content. This is very important. This word here, content. Because there are people that take like 10 years before they put their book out there, or even submit it to a publisher. Which is insane. I understand there are people that are perfectionists and probably write far richer stories than I do, and that's totally okay. Everyone's a different writer. That's awesome. But but in terms of confidence and being content with your own products, story-wise, that's too long. I'm sorry, but I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't take 10 years before doing that. Now, as for film, that's different. If a movie takes 10 years to make, it's not a writing issue. It's a bunch of things. It's the crew itself. What if the original production team bails on the director who wanted to do this movie? You know, there's a lot of people involved. That's why movies take so long, because it's a lot of organizing, and there's scandals because there's actors who are out there in the limelight, and they can cause a little disruption and create a bad image for the whole movie. So you have to consider that comparison. Now, what I really want to emphasize is the number of revision you do. If you do 20 drafts, there's a bit of an issue there, because if it takes you 20 drafts to get where you want to go, then that means that there is something you were not answering or considering in the first maybe 5 drafts. To me, that's Like if you're really a perfectionist, you want it to be right, and you have a really rich story that is very lengthy, yeah, 5 drafts sounds about right. But 20, it kind of sounds like, if that is you, that you're really uncertain of the end result. And that is where the myth of writer's block comes in. Now, I say myth because I found over time that whenever I used to get writer's block, that it was just my anxiety of the execution of what I'm writing. And once you understand that's what writer's block is, you get over it, because you realize that the first draft is just me going blah, there, first thought done. And then you actually start to understand that now that you've done the groundwork, which is what first draft is, you have that blueprint to work with. So you use that blueprint to get where you want to go. And then you start asking all the questions I mentioned for 2 and 3rd draft, and however your process goes. Now, as for language, as I was talking about, over time, when you become more practiced, you'll realize that you have a certain style, even if you're a multi-genre writer like me. There's a certain word choice that you stick to, and probably evolves over time as you diversify your reading, which is really important. That's what helps you define your style and your own way of speaking, and how you create character arcs and how you describe things, and then you become your own brand, like Stephen King. So, to really exemplify the importance of diversity, I'm going to make some book recommendations for you right now, whether popular or not. Okay? So they're right here. So first one, not first book, but just an example here, is Redwall. I don't know if you've heard of that series. Brian Jacques, who is a very talented writer, wrote, I think, 22 books for this series. I don't know, I might write an animal-based series, but the language was just amazing. I'll read you the first paragraph. Matthias cut a comical little figure as he wobbled his way along the cloisters, with his large sandals flip-flopping and his tails peeping from beneath the baggy folds of an oversized novice's habit. He paused to gaze upwards at the cloudless blue sky and tripped over the enormous sandals. Hazelnuts scattered out upon the grass from the rush basket he was carrying. Unable to stop, he went tumbling, cowl over tail. Bump! So, you might not understand what language means, because this may sound like just word choice or just description, but there's a certain cadence that Brian Jacques uses to bring you in. It's not just about action, it's about how it's presented to you. And now I'll read from The Company Man, written by Joe Clifford Faust. And only the first paragraph, just like the last book. First off, the chapter is called The Glass Highway, Minneapolis south to the Gulf. Very different tone, very different genre. A man was walking, face tucked into his coat against the cold winter wind. Martinello spotted him first. He had been fiddling with the radio, and had stopped on a station broadcasting a pop song he liked, No Corazon. He reached over and tapped his partner on the shoulder. There he is, Andy. See? Very different. What you'll learn over time, in terms of what language really means, it's understanding the tone and the implementation of your tools, in fine-tuning what tone and style of presentation, of action, and how you kind of tie in your action with your dialogue. Next book. Very different. Everyone knows this one. A Series of Unfortunate Events. Now this will sound more juvenile if you're an adult. But if you've never read it and you're an adult reading it for the first time, it's not annoying to read, but you'll understand that it has a younger audience. So, Chapter 1. If you're interested in stories with happy endings, you would be better off reading some other book. In this book, not only is there no happy ending, there is no happy beginning, and very few happy things happen in the middle. This is because not very many happy things happened in the lives of the three Baudelaires, youngsters. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny Baudelaire were intelligent children, and they were charming and resourceful, and had pleasant facial features. But they were extremely unlucky, and most everything that happened to them was rife with misfortune, misery, and despair. I'm sorry to tell you this, but that is how the story goes. So this one, what I find truly unique compared to the other ones that I read you, is that not only do you understand that this is not fantasy at all, but you understand the energy very clearly. Whether this is for a younger audience or not, you understand that this is going to be a very morose tale, but it will have a certain magic to it in terms of how the story enwraps you in the lives of the Baudelaire children. And in the first page here, we understand that these three characters are the key characters of the entire story. However they move around or separated or whatever, it focuses on their hero's journey. Okay? One more. Now this one is a fat one. It by Stephen King. Look at all that beautiful blubber. Oof, very dusty. Haven't read that in a while. So, what I found with this book when I first read it, if you're not a patient reader, this will be hell on your brain. But I had to read this quickly because during my schooling, I had a graduation class, and I had to read this book in 7 weeks. And I did. I was reading 60 to 100 pages a day. So, let me read the first page for you. Or first paragraph. Chapter 1. After the Flood, 1957. The Terror, which would not end for another 28 years, if it ever did end, began, so far as I know or can tell, with a boat made from a sheet of newspaper, floating down a gutter swollen with rain. The boat bobbed, listed, righted itself again, dived bravely through treacherous whirlpools, and continued on its way down to Witcham Street, toward the traffic light which marked the intersection of Witcham and Jackson. The three vertical lenses on all sides of the traffic light were dark this afternoon in the fall of 1957. And the houses were all dark, too. There had been steady rain for a week now, and 2 days ago the winds had come as well. Most sections of Derry had lost their power then, and it was not back on yet. So, this may seem very slow-paced, but look at this thing. That's 1,100 pages. So, what you get from this in terms of writing style is that it's very meticulous. There may not be anything that jumps out at you in terms of language or style, but what you do get is that this is going to be an extremely well-rounded book in terms of the story. That's not just action. There's also a lot of explanation and detail and backstories and things that have nothing to do with the main characters, but it has to do with the in-between stuff. But the first word you focus on is terror. So you understand right off the bat that this is going to be a dark book, a very long and dark book. So that's it for book recommendations that I can make right now. But to summarize, in terms of what revision is, it's all about taking your time and understanding the craft, and simultaneously not fussing over too much on it. Because whether you're new or seasoned as a writer, how you take your time and how you trust yourself is extremely important when it comes to revision, because it allows you to understand how much you want to put into this book and how soon you feel content with your end product before giving it to your editor. So I hope that you take everything I said to heart, and if you disagree for some reason, that's fine, but please be concrete with your disagreement, because if you just say you're wrong, you're not really saying anything. Come up with something more concrete. I'm okay with being wrong. I may be here to teach you, but it doesn't mean that I'm a know-it-all. I can say I know nothing, but I have an idea of how things do go, into writing. So I hope you found this class entertaining and educational, and have a good week and happy reading.